My grandmother always prayed before bed. It wasn't just a habit, it was a ritual. Every single night, without fail, she would kneel in front of a small, weathered crucifix in her living room and murmur her prayers. As a child, I thought nothing of it. It was just something she did, like baking cookies or scolding me for leaving my shoes by the door. But as I grew older, I began to notice the urgency in her prayers. There was a desperation in her voice, a tension in the way her hands clutched her worn rosary beads. I remember asking her once, "Why do you pray every night, Grandma?" She looked at me with a seriousness that unsettled me. "It's a promise I made long ago," she said. When I pressed further, she simply added, "Some promises you can never break," and quickly changed the subject. My mother avoided the topic altogether. "Let it be," she would say whenever I brought it up. "Your grandmother has her reasons, and they're none of your business." For years, her prayers were just a background noise in my life. But everything changed when she became seriously ill. She was hospitalized, and for the first time, she was too weak to kneel and pray. That night, as I sat by her bedside, she seemed restless, muttering fragments of prayers under her breath. "Why do you pray so much, Grandma?" I asked again, this time with a firmness I hadn't had before. Her tired eyes met mine, and she finally spoke. "I think it's time you knew the truth. When I was young, I had a little sister," she began, her voice trembling. "Her name was Clarice, and everything started with her. Clarice and my grandmother grew up in a small house on the edge of a forest. My grandmother described it as a peaceful place, with tall trees and a creek they often played near. But one day, everything changed. It was a warm afternoon," she said. "Clarice and I were playing near the forest, and she wanted to explore a new trail we'd never taken before. I told her no, but she insisted. And then, she was gone." She paused, her hands trembling slightly. I turned my back for 1 second, and when I looked again, she wasn't there. I called her name, but there was no answer. Her family searched the forest for days. Neighbors, police, and friends combed the area, but there was no sign of Clarice, except for her favorite doll, which was found lying neatly on a path. After a few days, my grandmother continued, "I started hearing her voice. At night, she would call to me from the forest. She said, 'Sister, come and find me.' Her parents dismissed it as grief and imagination, but my grandmother was convinced it was real. One night, unable to resist any longer, she sneaked out of the house and followed the voice. It led me to a clearing I had never seen before," she said. "And there I saw—" "What did you see?" I asked, my heart pounding. "A creature," she replied, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It was huge, with eyes that burned like embers. Its shape kept shifting, like it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. And then it spoke to me." "Spoke?" I asked, confused. "Not with its mouth," she clarified. "It spoke in my mind. It said it could bring Clarice back, but there was a price." I leaned forward, hanging on every word. "What price?" "I had to pray," she said, "every night without fail for the rest of my life. If I didn't, something far worse would happen." Terrified but desperate, she agreed. The next morning, Clarice appeared at their front door. But she wasn't the same, my grandmother said, her voice breaking. She didn't speak. She didn't laugh. It was like a part of her had stayed in that forest. Clarice lived a quiet, withdrawn life until she fell ill and died a few years later. But my grandmother never broke her promise. Ever since that night, she said, "I've prayed, because I know if I stop, the creature will come back. And this time, it won't just take one person." Her story left me shaken. It sounded impossible, but the fear in her eyes was undeniable. After that conversation, I started noticing strange things whenever I visited her house. Shadows seemed to move between the trees near her property. At night, faint whispers echoed, carried by the wind. The last time I saw her, she seemed more anxious than usual. "It's close," she said quietly. "Promise me you'll keep praying when I'm gone." I promised, though I wasn't sure I believed her. The night she died, I woke up with a strange feeling. Looking out my bedroom window, I saw a tall, dark figure standing at the edge of the woods. Its eyes burned like embers, just as she had described. Since that night, I've prayed every evening, not out of faith, but out of fear. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I hear faint whispers and the sound of something moving just beyond the trees. I know it's still there, waiting. Want to know more about this story and many others we still have to share? Then don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every day, a new story comes straight from our mysterious archive, filled with tales and accounts we've gathered from various sources. Cases with stories that will give you chills. Also, don't forget to share this video with that friend of yours who loves a good mystery.